You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Reynolds. I'm the owner of Summit Properties Northwest and Reynolds & Klein Appraisal. Today is Thursday, April the 2nd. We got through April Fool's Day. Not too many jokes out there. I didn't see a lot of people joking around. One of the jokes I did see was that a certain school district, that all the kids were going to have to repeat the entire 2020 school year. I thought that was kind of funny. I don't have kids in school, so I can always appreciate those, having all those years of when I did have kids in school. But today, we're going to look at the unemployment numbers. We had the unemployment numbers come out this morning, come out on a weekly basis, come out on Thursday. Today's Thursday. So a lot of what we're seeing is this shift from, oh my gosh, the coronavirus is taking down all these people, which it still is, and it's continuing to do so in even more numbers. It's kind of what the virus does. And the focus is now turning to the economic impact of this pandemic. And I think today's unemployment numbers are a pretty good indicator of what we're looking at, which is just a really tough time for a lot of Americans. For people all over the world, we've got all these economies just basically shut down. This will be some of the greatest crisis times, I think, that people will ever see, mainly because this one wasn't a slow recession kind of building up month after month after month. This was such an immediate, hard shutdown of the economy. So let's get into the numbers. And thank you so much for joining the Seattle Real Estate Podcast here. And we're doing this daily for as long as the coronavirus has everybody under a shutdown. And we might go daily after that too, because we're getting a lot of really good response to having a news source outside of the majors and somebody local here in Seattle. That's what we're doing. Okay, so the brutal unemployment data showed 6.6 million Americans filed for first-time jobless benefits last week. First-time jobless benefits, that's a big indicator of what's going on. These are people that previously had not been filing for unemployment. Now, the numbers from the week before were I think just over 3.3. Initially, there were 3.28 million, but that got revised to 3.3 something. So we are at a cool 10 million people who've filed for first-time unemployment benefits in the last 2 weeks. That is, I think that's a 3,000% jump in jobless claims that has devastated the U.S. Job market. You're going to see a ton of headlines like that. And do we want to ignore it? No. Do we want to put all of our efforts on focusing on it? No, because we know it's happening. Many of you listening to this, you might have been furloughed. You might have lost your jobs. But this is kind of what's going on. And then what we do is take this information and extrapolate it as best we can, try and figure out how everybody's going to get through this, because we will get through this. The Great Depression, the Great Recession, all of these things, eventually you do get through them. And are you beat up? Yeah. Everybody's going to be beat up after this one. There's going to be very few people who are not impacted, because this has taken such a broad swath of economic activity and health activity and just people's general lives. They've just gone wildly sideways. Nobody's doing what they're normally used to doing, including myself. I'm not used to not being, super active every day and working on a ton of deals. We have activity going on the Summit side. We have a lot of activity going on the Reynolds & Klein side. But the appraisal side worries me, because then I've got appraisers going through people's homes, exposing themselves, and that is a real concern. It's concerning having people working through this pandemic. It's an alarming thing to have to deal with. One of the things that came out that today that kind of blunted the unemployment news a little bit, and behind me, I always kind of point wildly behind me to, I think we've probably got on CNBC back there. I don't have eyes in the back of my head, I can't see, but usually we have CNBC going, because I feel that has as transparent of coverage of business as anything. It's not wildly directed to one or the other kind of political bias. So I watch a lot of CNBC. And the stock market has been doing okay, and that's mainly because President Trump had spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And both countries will cut oil production by about 10 million barrels. So the pricing has fallen out of the bottom of the oil industry, and you got to cut production, kind of prop that up, get some of those oil companies going back. Does that make sense? I don't know. Does anything make sense with all of this going on? I'm not really sure. I just kind of report the news as I see it, give you my spin and what I think is happening, and that's what I'm going to do. So let's keep going. So the Department of Labor figures on unemployment showed almost 10 million people have filed for initial jobs in the last 2 weeks, and that's a 3,000% jump. Economists characterize the increase as monstrous, number one, stunningly awful, and a portrait of disaster. Yeah, that's what happens when you shut down pretty massive economies and there's just nothing going on. These numbers are not going to get better. I think we're already in a recession. I think you're going to have people say, there is no way, based on these numbers, you're going to get out without a recession. Even with all of the stimulus packages going on, I don't think that is going to be able to, it's not that I don't think, I know it's not going to be enough to save us from a recession. And even if we go back to work sooner than probably the health experts are saying, and I think that will happen, and don't get me wrong, I've had a lot of people comment, hey, Sean, you want us to go back to work way earlier. I'm just reporting what I think will happen, not necessarily what I think should happen. And those are wildly different things. I think there's a fine balance between keeping the economy, somewhat underailed. Is that even a word? But right now, I think all bets are off as far as damage to the economy. It's happening. It's going to happen. And I think we still do need to be in a shutdown until we see those numbers on the coronavirus decline. Where is that fine line where you tell everybody, hey, it's go time, let's go back to work? I'm not sure exactly where that is. But as a small business owner, I hope it's earlier than later. But keeping everybody safe is a major consideration also, because this thing's taken out a lot of people. It's kind of really come on here. And if you look at the numbers, it's got a decent death toll. It's got a significant impact on everything. There's just nothing else saying that. So 3.3 million people the week before, 6 million people, 10 million jobless claims. That corresponds to roughly 6% of America's 165 million person strong workforce. So 6%. And the predictions are that this could go as high as 30% as this thing keeps going and we're still on a shutdown, as high as 30%. Now, in the Great Depression, we saw numbers right around 25%. 24.9% is the kind of official number that I always see on the Great Depression. And so if you see record numbers like 30%, just under 1 out of every 3 Americans out of work, I mean, this is just a nightmare, But I think everybody already knows that. If you don't know that, then you're not being realistic about what this has done to the economy. And I'm not trying to be a naysayer. I'm not trying to be a gloom and doom guy. But when you shut down an economy, just boom, done. I mean, there are some businesses still going, but the trickle-down effect from so many other companies not working, so many other industries not involved. Take out food from restaurants, you can only point to that for so long, and then you got to look at all the other companies involved that make kind of our economic world go around. Now, China's already back in business, and they were back in business after 51 days, and a lot of people are pointing to that. But also there again, they stopped recording their numbers for the virus. They just stopped. They're kind of like, you know what? Head down, let's go. We're going to put people back to work, whether it's safe or not. And then there's also the story going around of the 21 million, I think, cell phones that have been canceled. 21 million cell phones. cell phone accounts. That's a lot. Did all those people die? What happened? A lot of theories on that out there, and I'm not going to go into that because I haven't really researched that. I don't know. But a lot of my friends have kind of pointed to that and said, hey, we know that China is not reporting numbers. It's kind of like the federal government saying, hey, don't really give us your numbers on the unemployment because everybody knows this is going to be so bad that if we just ignore it for a little bit, we'll buy ourselves a little more time to kind of get things down the road, it'll be okay. And that's the situation we're in, is we know that the economy is just tanked. We're probably heading into a recession, and I'm going to take heed on that, but I don't think in a month from now anybody's going to even question that. So let's keep going. Coronavirus job losses could total 47 million. Unemployment rate may hit 32%, and that's from the Federal Reserve. That is the Federal Reserve's St. Louis District project, and that corresponds to a 32.1% unemployment rate. That is what they are projecting. The Fed research on this shows 66.8 million workers in occupations with high risk of layoff. Those people are in sales, they're in production, they're in food preparation and services. That's a massive swath of the U.S. economy. 67 million workers. Sales, production, food preparation, and services. Other research also identified people at almost 27.3 million that are working in high contact intensive jobs such as barbers, stylists, airline attendants, and food and beverage service. Those people, like, I've been kind of thinking, when am I going to be able to get another haircut? You have kind of those thoughts where you're like, this isn't a really relevant thought, and I know people are dying around me, and this is super insensitive, but when am I going to be able to get another haircut? Those are the weird things that kind of go through your mind when you're getting ready in the morning, or maybe you're not getting ready. I'm still kind of coming to work every day and shooting this podcast and kind of keeping the bits and pieces together that are going on out there, which lately has been more of a, oh, that contract got canceled. That is frustrating. What kind of fallout do we need to work on there? There is business going on. Homes are being sold. Homes are being listed, but it's just a tough market to be dealing in. So we've got a total of, between those two figures, the 66.8 million occupations with high risk of layoff and 27.3 million people working in high contact intensive jobs that aren't probably going to go back to work anytime soon. The barbers and stylists, the airline attendants, and the food and beverage service. Food and beverage, they are working on a trickle right now doing takeout. But most companies most businesses that run those, they are not operating, and they are looking at the stimulus package, and they're looking at other forms to keep them afloat, because like food and beverages, you run a bar, you run a restaurant, those take massive capital to keep going. And if you have a small interruption to service, there's your margin gone. And now you're looking at a negative, and now you're looking at a big negative, and moving forward to reopening, an even bigger negative, because the capital intensive cost of basically bootstrapping a company back up from ground zero, which is what they're doing. The only thing they are not doing is they are not recreating their physical real estate structures. All their other systems, those may or may not be in place. Do they have the cable they need to run their internet? I don't know. Probably. This hasn't gone on for long enough yet, but by the time we go back to a position in society where people are able to go back into restaurants, it's going to take a massive whack out of anybody in the food and beverage industry. So that would bring the U.S. unemployment rolls to 52.8 million, or more than 3 times worse than the peak of the Great Recession. The 30% unemployment rate would top the Great Depression peak of 24.9. So I did get that number right. So that is what's being predicted based on what's going on out there. Now, I have read a number of news stories about, well, those numbers are probably light because there's a lot of people that don't realize that they're eligible for benefits. There's a lot of people who can't get through on the systems to get to benefits. So if you are somebody, if you're a real estate agent, hey, you qualify for benefits. You need to look into it. You need to figure out all right, what's my income? Is there an income threshold here? And I haven't even really gotten into that because so many of these programs are still in the processing stage. I know we've got a massive rollout that comes. Darian, was that tonight or was that tomorrow night on the rollout for business?
Loans?
Yeah, the loans.
It's Friday.
It's Friday. So there's a massive federal rollout for small business and business loans, and that will happen as of tomorrow night. But in all the news stories that I'm watching is the federal government is saying, hey, we're rolling this out, but it's not really ready to be rolled out. So that's going to happen tomorrow night. That's Friday, and I'm looking over at the calendar. That's Friday, April 3rd. You're going to have a rollout of the federal government's business help. But those systems are not ready to go. This is such a huge endeavor for the federal government to try and help out all these companies that are shut down, that they're not going to be ready. These systems it's going to take weeks to get this in place. So it's one thing to talk about there's all these programs available. It's another thing to get the money into the hands of the people who really need it. And what I've read is that there's going to be these programs are first come, first serve. So if you are really hurting now, by all means, reach out and get your money, however that looks like. I know I've got friends that own businesses and they are getting unsecured lines of credit to get them through. I think banks are lending based on that. And this is going to be one of those things where you got to make the economic decision. Do I take out a bunch of loans to get me through this time period, or do I just shut it down because there is no way I can come back from this devastating downturn? Those are the decisions that are being made every single day right now is, can I ride this out? How much longer can I ride this out? My money, the funds that I have set aside to keep this going, those are dwindling every day, because every day that you go through without business is that's cash. Cash flow is king, and right now there is no king. And so those are things that I think everybody's thinking about, especially those of us in small business. All right, and one of the comments has been is, what is striking about this crisis is how broad, how deep, and how rapid these cuts have been. And that's because it's taken out just about everybody. And even the businesses that are considered essential, they are doing work, but they're really aware that the rest of the country is at a standstill. And it's kind of this weird time to be doing business, because you go to your office park and there's no cars, and you feel like, I shouldn't be here. I'm an essential business, but should I be here? And you kind of look around and you're like, this is not good. And so there are certain segments of the economy that they're still going along. I saw an interesting post in one of the Facebook groups that I'm in that I kind of look to for see what other people are thinking. And it was a real estate broker, real estate agent website, Facebook group. And one of the posts was one of the other brokers in the state of Washington. Real estate brokers were just considered, they were just clarified as essential workers this past weekend. And one of the thoughts from one of the brokers on there was, hey, make us unessential again. We don't want to be contributing to the spread of the coronavirus. And that's a real sentiment out there, is even though I can go to work, I don't want to go to work because I might infect somebody else if I do that. And that could very well have a negative impact on everybody down the road. And so there's that real consistent thought pattern that, hey, if we go back to work too early, this might cause even greater havoc on the economy than's already here. And knowing when that timeline is, that's as good a guess as anybody, but I think it'll be at the end of April. I don't think we'll go much past into May, maybe New York and some of the other places that have been hit super hard. Seattle has been hit super hard, but we kind of got in on the virus early, if there is such a thing. We experienced our outbreak and our death toll much earlier than other parts, and a lot of that has to do with our exposure to people from China coming here visiting SeaTac and running around in our community. All right. So these are unprecedented numbers, but we're also facing an unprecedented pandemic. That's true. We've never faced anything like this before. And here's how it's being handled. And we will work through that. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of gloom and doom out there, but we will work through this just like we've worked through every other kind of issue that's been out there. There might be some businesses that don't, but that's kind of just how this goes. It's collateral damage. And I'm hoping for everybody out there that they can make a go of this as best they can. So get educated, spend some time. If your businesses are not running, spend some time and figure out what your options are. That's one of the things I'm doing, is figuring out what kind of lifelines are there for businesses and for people if this thing goes, wildly south, further than we think it already has, or if we're shut down for a much greater period. Have those contingency plans in place. Yesterday, I talked about if you are a tenant, if you're a renter, then you're not going to be able to make your rent payment. What does that look like? What should you do? And a really good point that Darian Dunstan, my social media guy, made was look at the lease first. See what you agreed to, because that's what you should be doing. Now, what you can be doing, that's another thing. But look first at the contract you signed to see what that looks like. And then basically my podcast was yesterday is reach out to your landlord and get some kind of plan going if you can't pay this month's rent, if you can't pay April's rent. And that's the exact same thing I think a ton of businesses are doing. And people who are unemployed right now, figure out what your game plan is. And maybe unemployment that's what you hit right now. That's the thing that you go to and try and figure out what lifelines can you take advantage of and get some money in your system to kind of keep afloat. So that is that. And President Trump has extended the federal social distancing guidelines through April 30th. All right. And I think that's warranted. I think he saw the numbers and said, oh man, we cannot lift this. We can't go back to work yet. All right. It is what it is. In addition, major corporations such as General Electric, Macy's, and Boeing have shut down. They've announced layoffs or furloughed workers. I don't know if Boeing has done that, but I know General Electric just had a massive shutdown. They announced layoffs, and that's what you're going to see dominating the news for the next couple of weeks is companies and all the people that they are laying off. And that's what's being reflected in the 10 million people in the last 2 weeks that have filed unemployment. And a lot of this, the numbers can be undercounted because of the issues at the state employment offices, which were inundated with calls and unable to process them quickly enough. So if you are going to take advantage of unemployment, get in there, get it going now, understand the process, understand what it is that you're going to have to prove to get your benefits. But this is a first come, first serve, and the system is going to go tilt. It's going to get to a point where it just can't handle the number of people calling in or accessing the websites. You're going to see crashes. So patience is going to be a big thing to have in the coming weeks as we try and get through this. Same thing with businesses. And I'm going to spend some time on upcoming podcasts. The beauty about doing a podcast every day is that you don't have to wait and kind of hoard your ideas for really good podcasts. You can just let them rip every day. And one of them is going to be what businesses can expect as far as the federal bailout, what that looks like. Because from the accounts that I've read, only about 10% of the businesses who probably need the money are going to get it. Because of the $2.2 trillion package that got signed in last weekend, I think last Friday, I think there's $359 billion allocated for small business, and I think small and medium businesses need like between $2 and $3 trillion. So you need a massive amount of times the amount of money that's being allocated, but and that will be reflected, I think, in further stimulus packages that will happen. We've just had one stimulus package happen now, and we're already talking about the fourth stimulus package, what that's going to look like. And so expect to kind of hear this dominating the news segment, and you're going to hear less about the coronavirus because now it's kind of become something that is in the back of our head, like the opioid crisis It's kind of like cancer. It's kind of like alcohol. It's kind of like smoking. It'll be one of those things that kills a certain number of people every day worldwide, but we don't get too worked up about it. And I think once we have a vaccine for it, it becomes even relegated less. One of the things that is really concerning to me, though, is all the nurses and doctors, do they have the equipment to do what they're doing? I don't know. I haven't heard a ton of clear information on that. I know a lot of hospitals are getting to that point where they're at the kind of the tilt process of we don't have enough beds, but that's something that's always in the back of my head is, all right, if I had a heart attack for whatever reason and I went into the hospital, would I be able to get a bed? And if I needed a respirator, would I be competing against somebody with the coronavirus? And that's a very real reality. And that's some of the things that I think we're still trying to avoid as we're trying to figure out how we're going to pay for everything. And how about all the people who have probably had the coronavirus and needed healthcare but don't have it because healthcare in the United States is such a cluster. It's so expensive and it's such a cluster to get those benefits. But that's a whole nother issue. So I wanted to read kind of a little story here that I thought was pretty typical. An overwhelmed system is the headline. Aaron Heaps, 28, an actor, filed for unemployment in New York in March when the show he was working on, the national tour of Finding Neverland, was canceled as social gatherings were banned to curb the spread of COVID-19. At the same time, jobs he usually worked at restaurants in the city were on hold as non-essential businesses closed because of the outbreak. And he's talking about doing the unemployment. The website was crashing, so there was no point in even trying, he said. Eventually, he got through and was able to receive benefits. He's hopeful his restaurant jobs in the city will be safe after the pandemic, but is worried about acting jobs. The outbreak hit during what is usually a busy audition season. Same thing with us in real estate. This is our busy real estate season right now, April, and that's kind of just not happening. It's not happening the way it normally happens anyway. And this is going back to, what's his name? Aaron Heaps. I'm hoping to go back to lots of auditions, he said, but I may go back home to there being nothing. And I think that is what a lot of people are trying to figure out is, all right, we've got all these unemployment numbers. We're going to get through it. Somehow we'll get enough money. We may come out of this with a ton of debt on the other end, and the country certainly will, and each individual certainly will, because these stimulus packages, that is our money. That's our money that's being printed. That's debt that goes to us. So don't think of it as the government, and like when you don't make your mortgage payment, you don't make your rent payment, but you can actually afford it, you probably shouldn't do that. Hoarding cash is one thing, but you've got obligations and you got to pay those obligations because this is all a system. Everybody is kind of in this together. So getting what you can is one thing, but if you can pay, make those payments. Yeah, we might redline this one, and a lot of people might come out with a lot less savings or some more debt. But you do what you got to do in this kind of economy, and we will get through it. But the main factor is, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is at Summit, we have a segment called Snacks on the Sound, and we kind of preview a restaurant or a small eatery or a bar or something that has a really cool food product. And we're kind of like, man, when this is all said and done, how many restaurants are going to be left? It's going to be like the Survivor of restaurants. Who could make it through and reopen? That's a very real reality, is who's going to be able to open back up, and then what jobs are there going to be left after we're able to go back to work. A lot of jobs, I think, will be there, and a lot of businesses will crank back up, but it will be a wildly different scene than the one that we shut down a couple of weeks ago. So that is it for today's podcast. I thank you so much for listening. I will be shooting another one tomorrow. Not sure what the topic is, but it'll be something along the lines of, here's one more thing to consider on how to get through this, because we will. So that's it for me today. Stay safe out there. Stay home. Again, I'm Sean Reynolds from Summit Properties Northwest, Reynolds and Klein Appraisal. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening on a podcast platform, and if you're watching on YouTube, thanks again for watching. Really appreciate it. We will catch you tomorrow. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.